In the winter of 1841, a hush fell over Philadelphia's Kensington district, a silence broken only by the whisper of falling snow and the occasional chilling report. Residents began speaking of a ghost, a small girl who wandered the cobblestone streets at the first hint of dawn. Her small, bare feet left bloody prints in the fresh snow, the crimson trails weaving peculiar, almost deliberate patterns across the frozen ground. She was a child of no more than 8 years, a wisp of a thing with hollow cheeks and eyes that held a darkness far beyond her years. For hours she would stand motionless outside the imposing brick facade of the Pennsylvania hospital, her gaze fixed on its windows as if searching for something lost within. Those who dared approach close enough saw her lips move silently, forming words without sound, as if reciting some terrible memorized litany. When concern overcame fear and a citizen would approach, offering help or a kind word, the child would turn those ancient eyes upon them and speak. But the words that came from her mouth were not those of a child. They were the cold, precise terms of a medical text, descriptions of surgical procedures and anatomical details delivered with a clinical detachment that turned the stomachs of grown men and made seasoned physicians pale with a deep, instinctual discomfort. She spoke of viscera and bone, of incisions and sutures, with a familiarity that was profoundly, horrifyingly wrong. These sightings were not mere gossip or phantom stories, they were documented. City records from that brutal winter, misfiled and forgotten deep within the Philadelphia Municipal Archives, were discovered over a century later during a 1943 renovation. They revealed that 37 separate official witness reports were filed regarding this mysterious child. Yet, no investigation was ever launched. Each report was marked with the same peculiar chilling notation, a phrase that spoke volumes about the power structures of the time, *medical discretion advised*. The truth of the child Sarah Montgomery and what had been done to her within the walls of Philadelphia's most prestigious medical institution remained a secret, hidden behind locked doors and sealed documents, a conspiracy of silence that stretched across decades. Philadelphia in 1841 was the beating heart of American medicine. It was a city of towering ambition and scientific progress, where the nation's brightest medical minds gathered to push the boundaries of knowledge. The Pennsylvania Hospital, founded by Benjamin Franklin himself, stood as a monument to this endeavor, attracting physicians from across Europe who came to study under America's most renowned professors. The city boasted more medical schools per capita than any other, and its physicians published more research, pioneered more techniques and wielded more influence than their counterparts in Boston, New York, and Baltimore combined. But this glittering veneer of progress concealed a rotten core. This was an era before ethical oversight, informed consent, or government regulation. The concept that a patient had rights was foreign. The idea that medical experiments required approval was laughable to ambitious men of science. In this environment, doctors operated with a freedom that would be considered monstrous today, particularly when their subjects came from the city's most vulnerable and voiceless populations. The Kensington district, where the bloody-footed girl first appeared, was a world away from the polished cobblestones of the medical district. It was a desperate, crowded warren of ramshackle tenements along the Delaware River, home to waves of Irish immigrants fleeing the creeping shadow of the potato blight that would soon devastate their homeland. These families arrived with nothing, crowded into disease-ridden boarding houses where cholera outbreaks could claim entire families in days and industrial accidents maimed and killed with brutal regularity. The mortality rate in Kensington exceeded 30% in some years. For immigrant children, life expectancy was nearly 15 years shorter than for those born in the city's wealthier quarters. It was here, among the destitute poor who had no political voice and fewer legal protections, that certain members of Philadelphia's medical establishment found their most convenient subjects for experiments that would never have been attempted on patients who could afford lawyers or had connections to the political elite. At the center of this darkness was Dr. Cornelius Thorne, A man of considerable reputation and wealth, Thorne had built his career on revolutionary treatments for what the era euphemistically termed hysteria, nervous disorders and melancholia, conditions that encompassed everything from depression and anxiety to severe psychological trauma. His private practice occupied a magnificent 4-story townhouse on Walnut Street, catering exclusively to Philadelphia's wealthiest families who paid enormous sums for his pioneering therapies. These included mercury compounds imported from European mines, opium derivatives processed in his own private laboratory, and electrical stimulation devices he had designed himself after studying equipment in London and Paris. Thorne's published papers in the American Journal of Medical Sciences had earned him international renown. Physicians from Vienna and Edinburgh traveled to Philadelphia to observe his methods. His correspondence, preserved in the archives of the College of Physicians of Philadelphia, reveals a man obsessed with progress at any cost. In a letter to a German colleague, Dr. Hinrich Zimmermann, Thorne wrote, "The advancement of medical science requires a willingness to explore territories that conventional morality might consider forbidden. Our oath is to healing, but healing on a grand scale sometimes demands sacrifices that individuals cannot understand." Yet few questioned the source of his extensive case studies on childhood psychological disorders, research that would have required access to dozens of young subjects over extended periods, access impossible to obtain through legitimate channels, as no wealthy family would willingly subject their children to such risky experimental treatments. Sarah Montgomery's parents, Bridget and Seamus, were among the desperate thousands who had arrived in Philadelphia aboard the merchant vessel Celtic Dawn in September 1840. They carried little but their 8-year-old daughter, a few belongings wrapped in oiled cloth, and dreams of escaping Ireland's grinding poverty, which had already claimed Bridget's parents and 2 siblings to starvation and disease. Seamus found back-breaking work in the textile mills along the Schuylkill River, his wages barely covering rent. Bridget took in washing from wealthy households, her hands cracked and bleeding from scrubbing clothes in icy water throughout the winter. They rented a single room in a Kensington boarding house owned by Mrs. Agnes Kellerman, a sharp-eyed German immigrant who had fled Prussia in 1838 under mysterious circumstances involving her late husband's political activities. Mrs. Kellerman kept meticulous records of her tenants, their occupations, health, family ties, and financial struggles. This detailed documentation would later prove crucial. The winter of 1840–41 was particularly brutal. Seamus developed a persistent cough from the cotton fibers in the mills, a condition that gradually worsened into what is now known as brown lung disease. As his health failed and medical bills mounted, the family faced an impossible choice, one confronted by countless immigrant families each winter: surrender their child to a charitable institution that promised food, shelter, and education in exchange for the parents' legal guardianship rights. These institutions, ostensibly run by religious and medical societies, often served as pipelines, funneling vulnerable children toward the experimental research that funded Philadelphia's medical advancement, research that required subjects who could not protest, escape, or seek legal recourse. On the morning of January 15, 1841, Mrs. Kellerman discovered the Montgomerys' room empty. The child was gone. Her few possessions, a worn doll made from Irish wool, a small wooden cross, her tattered dress from the voyage had vanished. Left behind on the rough wooden table was a single piece of paper, its elegant script clearly from an educated hand. It read, "The child Sarah Montgomery has been placed in proper medical care for her own welfare and advancement. The family's outstanding debts for medical services rendered to Seamus Montgomery are hereby considered satisfied in full. Further inquiries regarding this placement are neither necessary nor advisable." It bore an official-looking seal of the Philadelphia Medical Society, an organization that investigation would later reveal did not exist. Bridget Montgomery's screams that morning drew neighbors and constables. She confessed that men in dark coats had visited during the night, whispering with her husband. Desperate to secure treatment for Seamus, they had signed papers they couldn't read, believing it was their only hope and that Sarah would be returned to them once their situation improved. But when the desperate parents tried to find their daughter, visiting every hospital, orphanage and church in the city, they met a uniform wall of silence. No such child was registered anywhere. Officials claimed children placed by parental consent could not be considered missing. The truth was far more sinister. Dr. Thorne and a select group of ambitious physicians had established a clandestine organization, the Society for the Advancement of Neurological Science. This group acquired children from desperate immigrant families under the guise of charitable care. These children became unwilling subjects in experiments, testing the limits of psychological manipulation, pharmaceutical intervention, and what Thorne called cognitive restructuring, procedures designed to fundamentally alter mental development through controlled trauma and chemicals. The society operated through a network of intermediaries who identified vulnerable families, legal representatives who created fraudulent documents, and medical facilities hidden within Philadelphia's industrial district. The operation was funded by Thorne's private practice, contributions from wealthy families who benefited from his refined treatments, and payments from European medical schools that purchased his detailed horrific case studies. That January night, Sarah was taken to a private facility hidden in the basement of an abandoned warehouse near the port, officially owned by the non-existent Delaware Medical Supply Company. It was equipped with primitive surgical suites, a pharmaceutical lab, and holding cells disguised as bedrooms. Here, children were subjected to graduated doses of mercury, laudanum, and other substances. Their every reaction was meticulously recorded in leather-bound journals. Sarah, designated Subject S41 in Thorne's records, was noted as a healthy, intelligent girl with an exceptional memory, an ideal candidate for Thorne's accelerated cognitive restructuring. The basement was a controlled environment, soundproofed, with artificial lighting to disrupt sleep cycles and a ventilation system for introducing chemical vapors. In the weeks following her disappearance, strange reports emerged from the medical district. Hospital orderlies heard children's voices reciting medical terminology from supposedly empty basements. Nurses found surgical instruments arranged like macabre children's games. Medical students reported seeing a small girl observing lectures, taking notes, and even correcting professors, only to vanish when looked at directly, leaving behind the faint scent of mercury and laudanum. These were dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations, but the descriptions were always the same: a small girl with old eyes. Thorne's research progressed with methodical precision. His coded logs documented a systematic process, establishing behavioral baselines, introducing mercury compounds to observe neurological effects, then opium derivatives to test pain tolerance and malleability, finally combining substances to create controllable dissociative states where subjects could be programmed to respond to specific stimuli. The logs charted Sarah's terrifying transformation. Initial fear and resistance gave way to an unsettling adaptation. Within 6 weeks, she could recite complex anatomical terms, identify surgical instruments by touch, and understand medical procedures that shocked experienced doctors. She developed empathetic dissociation, analyzing her own suffering with clinical detachment while maintaining emotional awareness. Mrs. Kellerman, drawing on her experiences with Prussian medical abuses, began her own investigation. She discovered a pattern: immigrant children from desperate families, all intelligent, all approached by well-dressed men, all vanishing after parents signed unreadable documents. She connected with Rebecca Stanwood, a Quaker reformer investigating the disappearances. Together they mapped the cases, noting the common elements and the systematic obstruction from authorities. By summer, the warehouse held nearly 20 children. The facility had expanded into a grotesque parody of a medical institution. The daily routine was a blend of education, experimentation, and psychological manipulation. Mornings involved academic instruction laced with medical terminology. Afternoons involved direct participation in procedures, with children serving as both subjects and assistants. They learned to administer injections, monitor vitals, and maintain records, all while under ongoing pharmaceutical manipulation. Sarah had become Thorne's most successful subject and an unwilling collaborator. Her conditioning allowed her to shift between clinical detachment and artificial childishness. She conducted assessments of new arrivals, prepared pharmaceutical compounds, and served as a liaison, translating medical concepts for younger children while preparing them for procedures. She comforted them during trauma while collecting data on their responses. The other children feared her. Dr. Edmund Hartwell, Thorne's research partner, began expressing serious concerns. In a letter to his brother, he wrote of Sarah, I fear we have created something that neither medical science nor human compassion can adequately address. His alarm crystallized in late July when a 6-year-old Polish boy, Stanisław Kowalisz, died during a mercury threshold experiment. Thorne documented the death with clinical detachment. Sarah's reaction was the final straw for Hartwell. Rather than trauma, she displayed clinical curiosity enhanced by emotional engagement, examining the body, taking notes, and suggesting protocol improvements. Hartwell began secretly documenting the facility for evidence, sketching layouts, copying protocols, and planning an escape. He learned city health officials were planning an inspection of the warehouse district due to cholera concerns. He arranged for Stanwood and Kellerman to be present, armed with their evidence. On August 3, 1841, as inspectors approached, Thorne chose to destroy all evidence. He prepared lethal doses of laudanum and mercury, intending to kill the children and claim they had died in a cholera outbreak. But Sarah, with her conditioned understanding, recognized the preparations. She approached him not with pleas, but with a chillingly precise analysis of why his plan would fail: the lingering odor, the chemical burns, the existing documentation from Mrs. Kellerman. She spoke with the analytical depth of a colleague, dismantling his plan with the knowledge he had given her. She even offered alternative, more effective methods of concealment, discussing her own potential murder as an interesting theoretical problem. When the doors burst open, inspectors found a scene from a nightmare. Thorne sat defeated, while Sarah calmly explained to the other children what would happen next, how they would be questioned, and why their memories might be unclear. The children displayed varying degrees of trauma and unnatural medicalized behavior. Sarah herself oscillated between clinical recitations of the experiments and the tearful childish requests for her mother and her lost doll. The Thorne never stood trial. He was found dead in his office from a self-administered overdose, his suicide note describing Sarah as his most successful and most tragic outcome. The official investigation concluded with a whitewash. The medical society disavowed him. City officials claimed only 11 children were found, though witnesses saw more. Families were slowly reunited, but the children bore lasting scars. Sarah's reunification was the most tragic. The girl her parents had known was gone, replaced by a being with a physician's knowledge trapped in a child's emotional world. She remembered everything with perfect clarity, but struggled with basic social bonds. Mrs. Kellerman and Rebecca Stanwood documented her long-term recovery, a haunting case study in systematic abuse. Sarah lived to adulthood, a consultant on difficult psychological cases, using her unique knowledge while avoiding normal life. She never married or had children. Her memoirs, discovered in the 1920s, provided the fullest account of these early medical horrors. The warehouse was demolished, the site now buried under a parking lot, marked only by a small historical plaque. The incident sent shockwaves through the medical community, spurring early debates about ethics in human experimentation, though meaningful change would be slow in coming. Sarah Montgomery's story stands as a permanent testament to the dark price of knowledge pursued without conscience, a reminder that the most vulnerable often pay the highest cost for what is called progress. Her bloody footprints in the snow were not just a path of suffering, but a trail leading to a darkness hidden in the heart of a city, and an era that preferred to look away.